Okay, is this on? Yes, thank you. Okay.
So welcome back. Nice to be with you again. So we have about 1 hour for a fast-paced discussion with our esteemed panel, and we hope adequate time to allow questions and comments from all of you. So let me introduce our panel. I'll start down on the far end. So Martin Koehring, the senior editor from the Economist Intelligence Unit. Then next is Dr. Dragana Lakić, Faculty of Pharmacy in Belgrade. Did I say that right?
Yep.
Ex-member of the Pharmacoeconomics Committee of the National Health Insurance Fund, and she conducted an independent dry run of the PVA system. So welcome. Thank you for being with us. And Professor Natasha Bogavac. Did I say that right? Okay, good enough. All right. Associate Professor of the Faculty of Pharmacy in Belgrade, Vice President of the Serbia Regional Chapter of ISPOR, and also a conductor of the dry run. Okay. Next we have Dr. Mark Molnar, a health economics expert from Corvinus University of Budapest, and of course we have Dr. David Danko, who is the research leader on the PVA from Corvinus University of Budapest. So that is our panel. I have specific questions for each, and we will go down the line and allow people who wish to respond to the comment to dive in as well and do so. First question is for Martin. Martin, thank you for that illuminating and most helpful presentation on the regional and the Serbian healthcare system. Just to get to the point, what other countries in the region should Serbia look to and aspire perhaps to emulate in certain ways? What about other countries in Europe, perhaps comparable in size? Who do you admire when you've looked at these problems? Who's doing this better that would be a role model, perhaps, for Serbia to think about?
Yes, I mean, this is a particularly relevant question because our study actually looks at across 10 Balkan countries. And if we look at the country that I would say is particularly on a good path, I would say. I mean, none of the countries in the region actually have a health, what we would call a health technology assessment infrastructure, one that would be comparable to Western Europe, for example. But Croatia, I think, is the country that is on a very good path. And Croatia has adopted a guideline on the HTA process in 2011 already, so they started quite early, and they're really starting to get a more systematic approach. And they also have risk-sharing agreements in place with manufacturers, so they have the budget impact analysis, and they're trying to highlight, that the priority setting process is much more in place in Croatia already. So definitely I would say Croatia, Slovenia as well, but I would say Croatia is a country in this particular debate where Serbia could look up to. And if we look outside the region, we have Portugal. I mean, Portugal is comparable to Serbia in many ways, not in all ways. Of course, there's always, when you compare countries, it's so difficult. But Portugal also has difficulties with their budget. I mean, Portugal had the debt crisis and so on, and they had severe cuts in their healthcare spending and also in their pharmaceutical spending from 2011 and so on. So to get their public finances in order, similar to Serbia, where budget cuts have really been implemented since 2011. So restrained budgets, both for Serbia and Portugal. But with Portugal, what they have done is they have really focused on efficiency in the system. So I mentioned earlier with Serbia that the primary healthcare infrastructure is really an issue, with shortages in primary healthcare workers and administrative staff. In terms of hospitals, actually secondary healthcare sector is actually not such a big issue, for example, in Serbia. The same in Portugal. So what Portugal did is they really focused on getting at the heart of the problem. They actually rehired retired doctors to fill shortages, and they built a completely new system for primary health care. So they came up with family health units that are, multidisciplinary units of general practitioners working together and really looking at an integrated disease management process. So it's not just, if someone has a particular disease, here's the specialist to deal with it, but actually looking at having a multidisciplinary team. And this is really primary healthcare. So it's really going back to the basics. And Portugal is really setting a great example here that Serbia could use in terms of improving the primary healthcare system. And then the debate today has focused obviously on health technology assessment and reimbursement systems. The PVA system was introduced. So in that regard, Portugal is also a good example, because in 2014, so only recently, they came up with a new health technology assessment approach whereby they really look at the patient. And I think you mentioned as well in your presentation, I think that's really going back to the core of why we are here. I mean, why are we debating these issues? We're debating them because of the patient should really be at the center of this. And Portugal has done this, so they're really focusing on patient outcomes. So everything they do is based on, or they're trying to be focusing on performance. So really, like hospitals, for example, are increasingly paid for performance, so the end result of care. And this focus on patient outcomes means patient data is collected more efficiently and is integrated into the health technology assessment process. So if Serbia could aspire to that, that would already be a great way. I mean, maybe the PVA will be a step in that direction, but I think Portugal outside of the region is a country to aspire to.
Fantastic, thank you. Any other nominees for systems that you think Serbia might want to emulate?
Well, maybe just can I add one thing? I'm completely straightforward with Martin regarding the health system in the neighboring country. Croatia is on a good path, and also Slovenia is on a good path. Our problems are much larger than they are. So I would love to be Portuguese, but I cannot be one. So maybe we can just do the small steps and aspire towards the Croatia and Slovenia healthcare system.
Okay, thank you. Yes?
Just one small addition. I think Portugal is a good external reference, but if you just consider all the countries in the Central and Eastern European countries, some of them are ahead, some of them are behind, but I think all the challenges, for example, Hungary had to face with 10 years ago, around the time of joining the EU, are quite similar from the aspect of HTA systems. So I think countries like Serbia, for example, or all the other countries in the Balkan should consider the lessons learned or might be learned from these examples from the Central and Eastern European region.
Okay, thank you. So, Dr. Danko, so I know there are people out here in the audience, and they're not saying it because they're too polite, but they're thinking, how can Serbia afford to do this? And so the question is, when you consider that question, what response and advice can you offer in terms of people who that will be one of the first questions on their mind? Can Serbia afford to implement this system? And do you have any experience from your work with other developing countries in terms of addressing and tackling this central problem of paying for this and reimbursement?
Well, I think this question, it comes up everywhere, and it's an extremely fair question. Now, the answer has more parts. So what's the price of not doing anything? I think that's also the opportunity cost approach that's relevant. The second is that what would be the cost of implementing a full-scale HTA model? And it's not comparable. So if you look at Poland, Hungary, Slovakia, again partly, which have implemented much heavier approaches, and what the societal benefit from them is, I think the ratio is not necessarily too good. So if you take this approach, or any type of lighter approach, honestly, where the cost of implementation is much, much lower, and the benefit is less scientific but a quicker decision, I think that the ratio should be better. And to answer your question more specifically, it may be scary that this or any similar system requires a number of different resources, but very honestly, there is a learning curve, and the first assessment may take 3 weeks, but the 22nd assessment may take 2 days. And this is not necessarily a signal of superficiality. Well, it means that actually that where you check the references and resources, it becomes much quicker. When we did the dry run, actually, I think that this 2-day target is not absolutely unrealistic. One comment though, it will very much depend on, and it's background info that when we were doing the dry run, we had the data, so we had almost the submission. So if the submission is incomplete from a pharmaceutical company, necessarily it will lead to delays. But if the submission is fair and all that information is incorporated, which is needed for this assessment, then I think that it's quite a straightforward exercise.
Okay, great, thank you. Any comments in response to that? So, no. So, Dr. Molnar, so you have a vast amount of experience in terms of reimbursement practices, following up on the prior question, and in particular in other countries, particularly Hungary. Can you tell us anything about the experience from Hungary? And I think also you've done work with Lithuania in particular. Anything you've learned from those that you think is particularly relevant to the Serbian context and that would be useful for folks here?
Yeah, just before answering your very valid point, a short remark to this affordability issue. I think it's quite crucial to make to distinguish between the affordability of new drugs and affordability of building up an HTA system, because I think in a common thinking it might be confusing. So I think the main point of this pragmatic value assessment approach is to build up an HTA system which is not costly, which a country like an average Central European country can afford, and leveraging on international experiences rather. Affordability of new drugs, we've seen that Serbia, for example, has a backlog of 200 something innovative drugs. That's another point, and I think we need to take care of the. So we need to distinguish between the two. Related to your question, so I had the luck, or I was unlucky enough to be responsible for the drug reimbursement system in Hungary just right after joining the EU. So basically it was the period when transparency directive was implemented, and basically Hungary had to face all the questions Serbia has to face at the very moment. So I would say that Hungary answered the crucial question, some of the crucial questions in the right way, and some of them not. And I'm absolutely convinced that all the countries, southern and eastern, from Hungary needs to consider these bad or good answers. Hungary has built up a quite, as David mentioned, quite big HTA body, which is quite costly, and it considers mainly the health economics part of the analysis of drugs. And as we realized between 2006 and 2010, it's costly, but it's not always easy to build on the conclusion of such a scientific approach to run HTA. So I would suggest all the countries a few years behind Hungary to focus on the cost effectiveness of such an analysis, such an evaluation system, and basically that's why we propose something which is quick and leveraging on external references rather than building up a resource-consuming, resource-intensive way to make those analyses.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. So let's move to the issue of the dry run and the experiments that our colleagues here have taken. We'll start with Dr. Bogavac. You did the dry run, you participated in it, and you had some conclusions from that experience in terms of implementation and feasibility of use. Can you describe your experience and what you learned and what you observed from taking this on?
Yes, thank you, John. Ja ću se, stvari, odgovorit ću na pitanja na srpskom jeziku. Inače, donošenje odluka u zdravstvu nije jednostavno i zato je razvijeno više različitih alata koji olakšavaju donošenje odluka. Multi-criterium decision analiza je jedan od alata koja ima široku primenu i sve više se koristi u zdravstvu i još 2014. godine je prepoznato od strane AISPOR-a i sve više se implementira, znači, u zdravstvene sisteme. Već smo ranije čuli da je ovaj PVA model jedinstven model. Oslanja se na ovaj multi-criterium decision model zato što uključuje različite varijable ili jednostavnije da kažemo uključuje različite kriterijume koji ne podrazumevaju samo ekonomske kriterijume, već neka etička i socijalna pitanja. Nakon evaluacije modela možemo da zaključimo da su ti kriterijumi jasno definisani, da podaci koji se unose u taj model su dostupni i ono što je najbitnije su transparentni. Posljedica svega toga jeste da donosioci odluka u stvari imaju informaciju o prioritizaciji lekova, znači izvršena je jedna vrsta ponderisanja i znači ova mogućnost da su kriterijumi jasno definisani, da su svi podaci znači dostupni, ona povećava kvalitet donesene odluke, a to što su podaci transparentni u stvari daje veći legitimitet donesenoj odluci. Tako da je to neki zaključak nakon evaluacije ovog modela.
Okay, thank you. And then Dr. Lakić. So you also participated in the dry run, and you also have had experience with the National Health Insurance Fund and the existing prior system. So you are able to look at the PVA with very much of an inside view of what has been going on inside the Serbian health system. So can you talk about your experience doing the dry run and related in particular to your inside knowledge and familiarity and very close familiarity with how it's done right now and how the PVA would represent a change and something different?
I would also provide the answer on Serbian just for the sake of the audience and maybe to encourage you for question and answer afterwards. Ja sam nekad ranije radila u Republičkom fondu za zdravstveno osiguranje u delu Komisije za farmakoekonomiju, upravo u onom delu kada je Martin navodio da su lekovi stavljani na listu lekova, odnosno u periodu do 2007. do 2013. godine. I Nataša i ja smo testirale model dry run na odabranom broju lekova i ono što ja mogu da kažem za PVA model koji je procenjivan kod nas, jeste pre svega da je to, i to su i drugi govornici rekli, strašno brz način da vi dobijete određeni, transparentni i objektivni rezultat. Šta znači to brz? Danko je napomenuo recimo da je ukoliko vam je kompletan dosije, to iznosi oko 2 dana. U suštini, ako ste bliski sa tim lekovima, znači znate o čemu se radi u dosijeu, to je zaista, može da se meri sa danom, odnosno delom dana, ako znate gde sve treba da tražite određene podatke i svi su podaci su vam dostupni. Sa te strane, zaista, model daje određenu prednost u odnosu na pređašnji, odnosno sadašnji sistem koji mi trenutno imamo za stavljanje lekova na listu lekova, jer je sadašnji naš postupak i prethodnih godina, naravno, znatno opsežniji u onom smislu da je znatno teža evaluacija celokupnog fajla, odnosno nemate ovako jedan numerički sistem, ajde da tako kažem, koji vas klasifikuje u određenu grupu. Da li ste ispod 60 poena ili ste recimo preko 90 ili ste između u ovom delu, pa ste za takozvano uslovno refundiranje. Ono što bih ja navela u svakom slučaju kao citat za jedne osobe, znaće drugi ljudi kad ja budem rekla citat, da je jako teško napraviti savremenu inovativnu listu lekova. To je kao da pokušavate muškarca broj 56 da stavite u odelo 52. Neophodno je da, kako bih rekla, skraćujete rukave ili proširujete struk ili neke slične stvari. Znači, na isti taj način vi morate da izvršite prioritizaciju lekova. Ovi su mi trenutno nešto bitni ili ovi mi nisu trenutno, odnosno manje su mi bitni. Ovo je moguće na ovaj način uraditi. Znači, sa ovakvim sistemom, što je Nataša rekla, sa ponderisanjem, znači da vi imate tačan skor koji govori nešto. Ja ne govorim da je model, da se mi razumemo, najbolji. Ovo je jedini model koji smo Nataša i ja testirale. Postoje drugi. Kakvi su, ne znam, isto moraju da se probaju i da se ustanove šta su njihove prednosti ili mane u odnosu na ovaj sadašnji model koji mi imamo, odnosno na model koji je testiran. Ali ovaj model kao ovakav koji je profesor Danko razvio, zaista vam pruža transparentan i brz način da vi izvršite prioritizaciju lekova koji trenutno čekaju u Republici Srbiji za dostupnost pacijentima.
Okay. Thank you both. That's very helpful. I want to ask Martin, Mark, David, do you have any questions about the dry run? Do you have any comments or thoughts beyond what our two speakers have informed us about it?
May I add one thing?
Yeah.
That during the dry run, we really tried to be as let's say, self-critical as possible, and in fact the model changed, and the weightings or the logic changed to a certain extent until we reached a significant level of robustness. But as I mentioned in my presentation, if a scoring model is poor, you spot it quite easily, and here we believe that that's not a real risk. It's a risk, on the other hand, that the model gives scores to clinical criteria. So if anyone in Serbia ever takes a Romanian approach and wants to use this system for a budget impact assessment, then this system is not suitable for that. It means then from a policy perspective, they need to criticize it, of course. My point is that this is balanced, and for an economic decision making, this is of course a compromise.
Mm-hmm. Any other comments?
One comment. I think it's really an exciting time really to talk about these issues, because it's in Western Europe, for example, it's also happening, this kind of experimentation. It's just that Serbia is at an earlier stage of that evolution. I mean, you think like countries like Germany, and also I think in your presentation earlier, Professor Danko, you mentioned the different approaches. For example, like you have the comparative approaches, you have the economic approaches, you have the blending of these approaches, and it's very much an experimentation that is happening and has happened in the likes of Germany, France, UK, and so on. It is not the case that there is this one model that is perfect and that works. I mean, Winston Churchill once said about democracy that democracy is the worst system in the world except all the others that have been tried. So this might apply to this one. It's just about experimentation and evolution and finding approaches that from other systems and just blending them in, adapting them for the Serbian context, and then in future continuing to develop the system.
Absolutely. Continuous policy improvement, I like to call it. Absolutely. Final question before we turn it to you. And this is for Professor Danko. So we've heard mention, including from the spokesperson from the ministry, of managed entry agreements as a solution for improving access to innovative therapies. I don't know how familiar people are with that, so maybe you might want to, for folks, explain what it is, and then is it an alternative to HTA or PVA? How should people think about managed entry agreements in terms of addressing the issues that have been raised and talked about this morning?
It's quite challenging to sum it up briefly, but I will try. So managed entry agreements are practically contracts between government and pharmaceutical companies based on local regulation and the civil code, in which contracts there are concessions from the list price of the drug to the government. From this point onwards, these concessions, discounts anything can be complicated, can be simple. There are financial types of agreements where it's absolutely about money, discounting. There are hidden ways of discounting. There are less hidden. There are more, let's say, simple way of discounting. And in these, and then there are the so-called performance-based or outcome-based agreements, whereby the reimbursement conditions of a medicine are linked to the real-world performance in a certain patient population. I must add that if you look at the example of the United Kingdom, Italy, Belgium, these agreements, the performance-based agreements, are used to concede discounts to governments, again, in a confidential and hidden way for the most part. So everything comes down to money. Why do we need such agreements? Everywhere, not only in Central Europe, everywhere. For two reasons. First, the affordability of a new drug is different in each country, and this is going to be a fact. And as long as there is international reference pricing, pharmaceutical companies are not going to provide a drug at the same, let's say, if there is international reference pricing, then differential pricing is not possible. So actually, they won't be able to provide the drug at different list prices in different markets. This is one thing. The other thing is parallel import or export, which is a problem. In this region, Poland and Romania are the two key sources of that. If there are different prices, so we need a tool to manage this price issue, and this is the managed entry agreement. Now, whether it's separate or together, it can be done separately. So actually, there is nothing which tells you that you cannot implement a system of different managed entry agreements without an HTA system. But then it's practically a semi-institutionalized bargaining negotiation. And there is no objective or hopefully objective input to that negotiation. So I think that an approach where there is an assessment and then the negotiation is based on the assessment is more robust and more legitimate and less arbitrary. Otherwise, it's simply a bazaar type of approach, which is fully fine if it's a money issue. But I think that if we really seriously want to talk about value and provide access to value at the therapies, then the first thing is not about discussing the discount, but understanding the value of the product.
So just to make sure I'm hearing you right, so you would say that a managed entry agreement should be a complement to an HTA, PVA type structure as opposed to a substitute or a replacement?
Yes, so if I need to answer yes or no, my answer is yes. And let me add one more thing, that practically these are subsystems in reimbursement policy. And we heard about the increasing and you mentioned this contradiction. I don't want to hurt anyone, but I would look at generic pricing, because that may be an issue. So then we have all the building blocks next to each other, and it becomes complicated. But generic pricing, new assessment of value for new drugs, managed entry agreements, these all need to be consistent. Otherwise, the system will get tilted at a certain point.
So was that description, does that fit with your understanding? Does anyone else want to add anything to this or on managed entry agreements? No? Okay, we nailed that to the ground. Okay, all right. So let's open it up and invite you all to make comments, ask questions on anything that we've talked about this morning, except Donald Trump. In the back, sir, yes. And could people who speak introduce yourself and tell us who you are? And not your whole life story, but anything interesting.
I'll try to be brief. So, Vladimir Zach, chairman of ISPOR Central East Europe Consortium. ISPOR is a global health economics organization with over 18,000 members. Usually, for John's sake, sometimes the presidents of AMCP, which is the biggest US association, are on board of directors within ISPOR and vice versa. So that applies also in terms of UNET HTA. So we have the president of UNET HTA within the board, et cetera, et cetera. So we are very well connected. The reason why we're well connected is because we're trying to ensure to have a balance in terms of equity and also to get the best possible innovative medicines to the patients at a good economic level. So without further ado, first of all, we would like to commend you for organizing this event, because multi-criteria decision analysis is a very important matter that we have identified over the last 4 years, especially relevant in the developing countries, Central East Europe, Latin America, Asia. And as such, it brings us closer to a couple of questions. The first one is, when we decide to use a tool, there are two parts to it. One is methodology, and the other one is the actual criteria. And what we have seen from the tool presented, that it was well developed and has some very nice criteria within and weights. But the issue is that it needs to be on a larger scale in terms of knowing all of the decision makers involved, teaching them about what the criteria is within the multi-criteria, what is multi-criteria, in order for them to be able to provide preferences and provide the actual input. And then once we have the pool of this information, then we can extrapolate it and have the actual criteria and the weights that would reflect. The second part to it is that it depends on also the disease space. It depends on who the decision maker is. The most important movement that we're having is that if we are going to go into multi-criteria and if we are going to transparency, then we have to also include a representative from the patient group, representative from the industry, representative from academia, and representative from the specific disease specialist that is, we're discussing the disease space. So it will be a multitasking in terms of the panel. The second part, and I'll be brief because there are a couple of just comments, is that when we talk about HTA and we talk about abolishing HTA, it goes against the UNET HTA. The reason why HTA exists is to deal with equity, because if you have a criteria such as whether CADETH in Canada has approved it, you know, in Canada the mean salary is 4,000 euros a month. Here it's 400. So we can't really compare and say it's something that's cost effective in Canada, it's automatically cost effective here, or in Scotland, for a matter of fact. So these are issues.
Okay, thank you.
And the second one is the cost effectiveness.
Yep.
Within the HTA Council, within ISPOR, we have determined, in terms of the preferences on criteria, we have identified minimum of 9 criteria, and one of them includes cost effectiveness. So it is important to know that it's not about all diseases, it's about the rare diseases, it is about oncology, and about the medical devices. Because this is where we have to deal with the frustration of something that is cost ineffective in how we're going to put it on, transparently on a positive list. So it is about transparency to start with. And in conclusion, think about the equity to start with. Thanks.
Thank you for those thoughtful comments. David, I think you'd want to probably take first crack at this.
I would like to reflect on one particular point, because I think that all these aspects and discussions came up during the process, and all of them are relevant, or they pop up at a certain point. I would reflect on the UNETA compatibility. Actually, last week I had the chance, or again the opportunity to be in Lithuania and to discuss these topics together with Wim Huch from who representing the UNETA initiative from the Netherlands. And actually, we agreed after 5 minutes that the clinical assessment part here is absolutely, let's say, compatible with the UNETA initiative to bring the clinical, so the RIA, the relative effectiveness assessment, to a European level. And actually, it's even more in line with what we consider relevant for Serbia, that you use external references instead of primary assessment. So when that part is done at the European level, it's even better, because then one crucial dimension of the system has been done within the UNETA framework. And then all the other components or dimensions can be added locally, as UNETA itself advocates that there are a number of dimensions and criteria which have to be done. So I think that this point is very much important, that there is a longer term compatibility between the two things, approaches.
Okay. Any other responses to this?
to this? Yes, Mark.
Just a short one, because it was mentioned that Canada, for example, is quite different from Serbia. So I think one thing is crucial. With the pragmatic value assessment system, you will conclude to some kind of ranking. And it's less likely that a drug is less valuable than another one in Canada compared to Serbia. So we are not saying that the conclusion is some ultimate something that you need to reimburse a drug or not, but the ranking, the comparison between two might be similar, or we can assume that it's similar.
Okay, thank you. Questions? Yes, in the back, sir. Could you introduce yourself, please, too?
I have some question, but I will talking in Serbian. Ja sam dr. Duraki, hirurg.
Give us a second.
Hirurg praktičar. 35 godina radim u praksi. Prošao sam zdravstveni sistem socijalističke Jugoslavije i sada ovaj sistem. Znači, zdravstveni sistem koji može omogućiti dostupnim sve savremene procedure i lekove, ili sistem koji će vam mnogo toga uskratiti. Moje pitanje je, ako bi se, koliko poskupljuje lečenje uvođenje ovog PVA sistema u praksu, da li naš zdravstveni fond može to da izdrži, imajući u vidu našu ekonomsku priču? Mislim da ovo što 5 godina nije uvode nijedan nov lek na pozitivnu listu nije slučajno. Da li iza toga stoji samo novac ili i neke druge stvari? Vi ste, gospođo, radili u fondu, otprilike znate tu stranu, da li možete da odgovorite?
Ja ću takođe odgovoriti na srpskom. Ovo što je predstavljeno kao model je jedan od alata koji se može koristiti. Da li je, opet napominjem, najbolji, ne znam, Nataša i ja smo procenjivali i ostali takođe panelisti su procenjivali kao članovi akademije korišćenje tog modela. Znači, kad smo Nataša i ja sele da procenjujemo model, prva stvar, nas dve potičemo sa iste institucije, imamo otprilike isto obrazovanja, ajde da tako kažem, odnosno taj background, pa smo opet imali neke nedoumice na koji način bi vrednovali određeni kriterijum. Takođe, da li bi uopšte vrednovali taj kriterijum ili ne. Znači, kakav će biti konačni, finalni izgled modela zavisi pre svega od onoga ko će ga koristiti, odnosno u ovom slučaju donosioca odluke, to je Republički fond za zdravstveno osiguranje, odnosno Ministarstvo zdravlja, kao recimo krovna institucija u zemlji Srbiji. Da li poskupljuje troškove lečenja? U suštini ne, zato što ne mora da znači, u stvari to je pravilnije da kažem, zato što je to samo alat koji ćete vi implementirati da biste evaluirali sve one lekove ili medicinska sredstva, svejedno, koja čekaju na konačnu evaluaciju. Sa tom evaluacijom vi ćete dobiti jedan spisak, ajde da tako prostim rečima kažem, lekova koji će vam se navoditi po prioritetima šta je prvo, drugo, treće, 15. Na taj način onda možete da pristupate recimo sklapanju posebnih ugovora, ok, ja ću početi sa prvih 15, pošto za toliko trenutno imam prostora, ostalo će trenutno čekati recimo narednih 3 meseca ili narednu godinu dana ili nešto 15. Opet kažem, ovo je jedan od alata. Da li je najbolji i da li je zapisan kao u kamenu? Ne, apsolutno ne, i to mislim da će Danko potvrditi kao autor modela. Model je podložan, kao i svaki alat, je podložan promeni. Promeni kriterijuma, promenu načina bodovanja pojedinih kriterijuma, tako da mislim da sa te strane treba imati poverenje, odnosno trust o kojem je govorio profesor John.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Yes.
Hello. My name is from U.S. innovative company Eli Lilly. And of course, we are, as many other innovative companies here, very much eager to, how would I say, help in this partnership with government. So we have heard how many countries have done something similar. So thanks for sharing this model that is health technology assessment adapted for Serbia. I think it would be very helpful. My question would be, Okay, my question would be, for example, could you share experience in these countries, as this is the partnering model with us, as a part of the health system with government, and it's clear out of this question as well that the government needs to make an effort to create an agency or a part of a health fund or part of a Ministry of Health that would probably do this assessment. So in the countries that you have already done this, how big an effort of a company was? So what was the time frame that this could be expected? Because you said 3 months is a long period, but after 5 years for us, every month is becoming, even longer. So could we have some experience? Is it something that it could be needed for years or 6 months? And how big effort of a government or help from our side can be done in this partnering model? Thanks.
So I don't think anyone has done anything like this, though. Is that? I mean, in the people have done HTA, but how difficult is it to put something like this in place? Do you think, and where does it go? I think is what you're asking.
Well, I think there were at least two questions embedded in one question, and let's try to tackle them sequentially. So first, this model. Okay, then a level 0 statement. If you ask me in private, I will tell you that there is no best way in health technology assessment. There are ways which are sold as best, and from that point onwards I don't trust them. There is no best way in health technology assessment, as there is no best way in health policy in general. So you can do two things. Either you jump on the bandwagon and you try to do something which others have done, and then you are likely to fail, honestly. Or you experiment, as Martin mentioned, and then let's take the example of Germany. They started to experiment with something, they made a U-turn, and then they came up with something absolutely German, which was different to the first idea. It's a classical process of experimentation. Look at Sweden. The thing which has experimented with a number of health policies. To be short, there's a certain type of double standardization, isn't there? That if a rich and clever country starts an experiment, then it's a positive thing. If another country starts an experiment, it's a risk. So I would say that the first thing to decide is whether you want to proceed at all with health technology assessment, and then there is a certain risk linked to that, and there is no best way. This is one way. And now the specific answer to the question. In the countries that I have mentioned, there are ongoing initiatives. So in Lithuania, Romania, Bulgaria, Hungary, there are ongoing processes in this direction. But the setup is very different, with the exception of so setups are different. In Hungary, the economic evaluation approach has implicitly failed. So a multi-criteria approach would be necessary. In Romania, which is closest to this, the implementation was terrible. So it cannot be taken as a benchmark for the implementation. And then we arrive at the absolutely commonplace answer, yet that look at the implementation part, take examples from countries, look at the model part, take examples from other countries, look at the score, the criteria, take examples perhaps from Taiwan, which has a similar system and it works pretty well, only that it's far away. Okay, so I don't believe in taking one country and saying that if the Poles have done it, then we will do it, because it's not true.
So it's certainly true there are not best ways, but there are better ways, right?
Yes.
Just a short remark, because David mentioned that the first question is whether Serbia wants to be engaged with the new HTA system or not. I think if Serbia wants to join EU, Serbia needs some kind of drug evaluation system. So the real question is which way to go, which solution to choose, and you are asking how much effort it takes to build up something. So I think the proper question is which is the less resource-intensive way to build up something, which is a good compromise, I would say. And that's why we propose to leverage on external references, because that would lead to a less resource-intensive way to conclude to an acceptable solution to evaluate drugs.
Okay.
Martin.
Yeah, just to say that this is actually a great time really to start this process, because now is the time where there's support. You know, the World Bank is supporting this process. The second Serbia Health Project, which includes support for HTA, and then there's also the EU accession. Serbia joined the EU health program, and now is the time, because now the international community is ready to help. So the momentum should really be used now.
Okay. So we have time for one more question. Yes, ma'am. And could you introduce yourself, please?
Hello. My name is Ljiljana Payne, Economics Institute, Belgrade. I don't have a question, but more as an observation. In my experience in the last 25 years, concept of cost effectiveness is not applicable in Serbia for a number of reasons. First, when the decision makers look at the costs, they only observe the costs made by the state agency, in this case healthcare insurance. They never observe, or at the moment we don't know actually, out of the pocket payments. So on the cost side, if you bring anything that's more than it's at this state of play, you just increase the cost. On the effect side, with high unemployment, low wages, the effect is really, not worth trying. So cost effectiveness, we tried really to prove so many times, at least about some research we've done, but nothing is cost effective, because you just add costs and the effect is not, you can prove it if you put everything in, but in this moment, it's really not the case. Thank you.
The voice of experience. This is hope. That's experience. What's the hope? A good place to close.
Okay, then. So I think that cost effectiveness as a concept is perhaps the best that has ever been defined. It's so intuitive, value for money. But when you operationalize it, sorry for the word, it's so unintuitive. And intuition is not the best thing in policy, I admit. But again, in an economic evaluation approach, you are prone to do something silly in a very scientific way in these environments, and that's not necessarily the best either.
Mm-hmm. So. Mm-hmm. Okay. Any other final comments? Okay. Well, so let me thank the panel for their excellent contributions and commentary and presentations. Let me thank all of the sponsors who put this terrific program together. And I want to thank all of you for taking such a big part of your day to be a part of this. Are there, and I'll turn it over to our excellent Master of Ceremonies for the conclusion and wrap up. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Sada ćemo pogledati odgovore ankete, pa možda možemo zajedno prokomentarisati. Evo, dakle, da li smatrate da pacijenti u Srbiji imaju dovoljan pristup savremenim terapijama? I najviše odgovora je pod C. Ne, pacijenti u Srbiji se generalno leče zastarjelim terapijama. Vidite i na engleskom. Da li smatrate da je proces stavljanja lekova na pozitivnu listu potrebno urediti uvođenjem sveobuhvatnog sistemskog i transparentnog rešenja koje uzima u obzir i prioritizuje potrebe svih pacijenata? Tačan odgovor, odnosno najviše odgovora je pod A. Da, mislim da je potrebno hitno uvođenje sistemskog rešenja, 74,1%. I da li smatrate da bi predloženi PVA sistem bio dobro sistemsko rešenje za antikorupcijskim mehanizmom i unapred utvrđenim kriterijumima za određivanje prioriteta za stavljanje lekova na pozitivnu listu? Pod A, najviše odgovora, 57%. Da, uveren sam u kredibilnost PVA sistema bez potrebe za značajnom revizijom predloženih kriterijuma. Ima li potrebe da se prokomentariše ovo? Ako ne, zahvaljujem vam na učešću, hvala i govornicima. Verujem da smo uspeli ovoga puta da dođemo do odgovora koji su bili važni i da imamo odličan uvid u trenutnu situaciju i željeni pravac razvoja srpskog zdravstva, posebno kada je u pitanju politika finansiranja lekova kao i proces stavljanja lekova na pozitivnu listu. Dame i gospodo, uvaženi gosti, cenjeni govornici, zahvaljujem vam se na odvojenom vremenu i prisustvu na današnjem skupu. Nadamo se da smo došli do zaključka koji će vam svakako pomoći.